Okay, Jim Howard here in Fort Worth, Texas. Today's date, it's just about an hour since my last short video. Since I've got these problems with audio and everything that I've been talking about, which I'm sure you're tired of hearing about, I thought maybe what I would do is this computer here that's set up, maybe I will use it a little bit differently than I have been making my videos. And I thought sort of run in this format, and the video was okay. But I didn't, of course, like the audio. So I just tried, which I just bought this a couple weeks ago on a Sony lapel. I think it's actually called something else. I think it's not lapel. And it's gotten good reports, and it's very little money. And it clips on your lapel or your whatever. But what I noticed was, for me, it's not long enough. So I thought what I would do is try this, which I've used in the past. I used this in the past for months, and it worked out okay. The same, same headset and everything worked out okay. So hopefully I have the settings okay with this. This isn't going to be very long because I want to make sure that my voice is already giving out. My voice has been giving out on me. So today's date, it is November 2nd, and right now it's 7:34 a.m. in the morning. I'm using the software for the camera on the computer. Now the camera is the Avery Media, and in the last video that I just made a few minutes ago, that's what you were hearing. But I think if this is working okay for me, the audio on this should be much better, and with the video pretty good. But as you know, I'm not used to. I'm always, the videos I've been making for the most part is you see the desktop, and I pull up things on the desktop, and this would be different for me to do. So if this works, let's see. Well, if this works, then I don't need to try any the other microphones, and I then just have to decide how I'm going to do this, and sort of work in the I'd have to do that by editing. That would be work for me. That would be work, but I could do it. Make the video like this, and then note where I wanted to pull in something like information about a new Windows release or update or something like that. Then I would have to edit that in. If I do it that way, I don't think I'll be using, well, of course I'll probably change my mind. I don't think I would be using Manicam or any of the other software that I own. Well, I would use probably what is it here? Let's see. Oh, I probably would use Movidia Video Suite. I wonder if that works on Chrome software. Maybe I should look around for some. Well, OBS does work, but I think on Chrome, I think you have to operate under Linux. Anyway, I'm thinking, which kind of hurts, especially this time in the morning. My stomach's growling. I should have grabbed some crackers. Excuse me. Well, what I can do, you won't see it, but I can just go over here and look at things, but you can't see them. Like CNN. Fed decision expected to ripple through markets. A huge tunnel has opened below Niagara Falls. Huh. You think some type of huge monsters will come out that have been living beneath the Niagara Falls? And that'll be the end of the world. Or it could just be a movie. They could make a movie. The Niagara Fall monsters that come out in and well, we have enough monsters in the world, you know. we probably have enough monsters in the news. Excessive alcohol use is a leading cause of U.S. preventable deaths. Here's what the experts want us to know. CNN website, by the way. Two doctors may say stop blaming mental illness for mass shootings. Trailblazing gay country star dies at age 78. Christina Applegate opens up about a multiple sclerosis diagnosis. C, the moment judge dismisses member of Parkland shooting defense team. Julia Powell, food writer behind Juliet and Julie, dead at 49. Kit Connor, I have no idea who that is, coming out is none of your business. I think the NBA dropped the ball on Kyle Irving. I don't know who any of these people are. Stanford says it's reviewing safety procedures after a man was caught living illegally in dorms. I worked hospital security for 30 years, and the first hospital I worked at, about 5 years, a Catholic hospital, and I don't think we had anybody, the nuns required, I think it was 8 o'clock for security to go through and remove visitors, and they didn't really make any exceptions, and that too, I'm not sure, well, just before I went to work for them, and that was in St. Joseph Hospital, Kansas City, Missouri. That would have been let's see, 70, was it 1978? Wait a minute, I'm trying to think. When did I get married? I can't remember when I got married. Anyway, the nuns, they didn't pay much for security. They objected. They were in the worst, that was the worst neighborhood for shootings and what have you in Kansas City, Missouri at that time. I know that, and I can say that because I lived a few blocks away. Not at right that time, but I had just, not long before that, lived in that neighborhood. when when my parents moved in to that neighborhood, it was like all white, and I can remember my father saying, and I would have been in the 5th grade, I think, and he said that there no concern because we had lived in another 2020 East 20th Terrace, and when we moved into it, that was a white neighborhood. And then I can remember as a kid a couple of men coming over to talk to my father, and I guess I was in the living room or something like that, and I heard them talking about how the real estate agents were busting the neighborhood. They were coming out to an all-white neighborhood, of course, and trying to get people to sell, list their house to sell. And then when those people sold, very few, one probably might be enough, then a whole bunch of other people would have moved out. And so the my father, he wouldn't sell. The other guy said, we won't sell, and they're talking to the neighbors. And and then right after that, one of the guys that came was a next door neighbor. We were on the corner, the terrace, 2020 East 20th Terrace. Just before I left Kansas City, many, many, many years later, in my mind, that area where, twice a week, the kids, we all went to the movie theaters and things like that. In my mind, that was how I remembered it. I thought, well, before I leave Missouri, I'll drive down there and see what the old house looked like sitting up on that, whatever. The city had totally taken out that area and made it into a school, I guess they had a school. Well, yeah, I went to Catholic schools, but yeah, they had completely redone so that the movie theaters, you know, the Tivoli and whatever the other one we went to, uh, it was gone. I remembered a water tower, I think it was, big water tower thing. And everything was gone, and even the streets were gone because they had. But anyway, the next one of the guys that came to tell my father, and about not selling, to blacks. Well, they would have said colored, I think then. But I didn't hear any, didn't hear the N word used or whatever. But the next door neighbor sold almost right away. So a black family moved in next door to us. There wasn't any problem at all. They had a little girl that I don't know if her name was Dale, because well, anyway, she was dressed up like a cowgirl. Had one of those wooden horses, it was like a broom, except had a horse's head on it. She was out there playing around. So my father did not. Other people started selling out and moving. My father, stayed, and there wasn't any problem. But I had a cousin that was. I had a whole bunch of cousins on the Howard side of the family, the Catholic side of the family. I was one of the older. I was born in before World War II, and so there was a few more cousins in there. But then there was a pause for the 4 years or so of World War II for the United States, and then of course there was a whole. As my father's brothers came back. My father, my mother, and myself, when World War II started, we went to. Of course, I was a baby. They went to California and worked building Liberty ships during the war. But then when they came back, all my father's brothers, I think 7 of them, were in the military during World War II, and different. One was in the Marine Corps, and he was really affected, adversely by the fighting in the Pacific and everything, and all, anyway, they came back. So then there was an influx of but on my mother's side of the family, she had one brother, and that was it. And they had my mother's brother and then his wife. They had a baby born about the same time as I was, but the baby died at some point, or early on. And now my mother's brother, he was an alcoholic and kind of abusive to his family. And my mother's mother, she had total heart block at an early age. And I think when my mother was in high school, maybe grade school, but she had complete heart block, and she wasn't expected to live very long. And but it turned out that I think when I was in the first grade and the second grade yes, I'm not first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. Well, anyway, my mother's mother, actually, she took phenobarbital, which is, I guess, addictive, and gives you a high or something. Like she took that for her total heart block. So actually, my job was to make sure that I was in charge of her medication and during the daytime, doled it out to her. And that's my mother's mother, who I called Mom. I called my parents, Jim and Betty, and I called, because my mother called her mother Mom, I called her Mom. But, so anyway, I got sidetracked. Oh, I know, yeah. I was talking about my cousins. Well, all these cousins that I had on the Howard side, they all had multiple, their families were like, 10, 11 kids or whatever. They were Catholic, Well, we were Catholic too, but I was an only child. But the cousin that was close to me was my mother's father, her brother-in-law, was he? Anyway, they had Bill and Willie. They had altogether 3 kids, but the first one I told you, died my age, and then a year later they had another. Willie, poor Willie, but she was a wonderful woman. Born again Christian or whatever, and put up with my mother's brother. But unfortunately, when Willie's first son, when he died, she didn't like Catholics. Willie did, and we were Catholic, But she was a wonderful person, and she didn't like Catholics, but I guess we got a pass. But the problem, apparently, from what I could tell as a young kid, was that her first son was, not baptized, died without being baptized, and she said that, a Catholic, or I don't know whether it was a priest or, what, told her that, since her son was not baptized, that he wouldn't go to heaven. And I was just, second grade, whatever. And, I told her, no, that's not correct, Somebody may have been Catholic and told you that. Maybe even some nun, might have said something like that, but that isn't correct. And I, several times I told her, but she didn't argue, but she just, she'd been told, and that like traumatized her. And, anyway, so her next son, Billy, and with all those Catholic cousins I had, he was the one, he wasn't Catholic, but he was the cousin that I would see occasionally. And of all those other cousins, they all, because they had large families, 10, 11, 12 kids or whatever, they all, they'd be like in a school. I went to Catholic school, but in a Catholic school, how would that be? How would that be? You have one of your kids would be like in every grade, and of course they'd have friends, and then those, they'd go to the Catholic school too, and whatever. But anyway, Billy and myself, we might only see each other, once or twice a year. There's some years or whatever. But anyway, we had moved, well, the house that was, we lived in, the neighborhood we lived in, that started to turn black. Anyway, Billy came over this one time, and we were out on the porch, and a couple, well, they were called colored then, I guess. A couple colored boys were coming up the, the street or whatever, and my cousin, yelled at them using the N word, and I was, nobody. My father didn't even use. My father was a Boilermaker all his life, and eventually he was, Boilermaker, the representative of the in the union. Went out and negotiated contracts and did all kinds of stuff like that. But I just couldn't believe, that he was using that word. I'm sure since my father was a Boilermaker, when he was on the job, probably the N word was used. But my father, I don't remember him ever using it. And also, when he became, he was a Boilermaker. I was actually a Boilermaker for a few years when I graduated from high school. I graduated from high school. I went to a military high school, Catholic, and intended to go into the Army as a career. And I went down, as soon as I graduated from high school, went down to enlist, and I was 40 pounds under the minimum weight requirement. I didn't know they had a minimum weight requirement. But then I ended up going to real estate school because my father, there was a book out, How to Make $1 Million in Real Estate. That was very popular. Now with the way things are, the way things happened, nobody would watch a TV game show where you only got $1 million. Nobody would want to do. You'd have to. The book would have to be. How to make $50 million without working, or something. But anyway, he was just. That book came out about that time, and I graduated from high school, and I couldn't get into the military. And I told my dad, well, maybe I could go to electronics. Well, it was called radio TV repair, and he said you should go to, and I had helped him get he was trying to clean up the union as just as a rank and file, and he'd attend the meetings, of course, union meetings, and get up and speak and make the union. The problem with the union at that time was, at least that local 83, was that the business agent, they had a business agent and 2 associate business agents. And excuse me, you if you were a Mason, Masonic, thing, that was the thing you needed to have in order to to get, if you were out working in the field, and you were going to be made the welding foreman on the job or whatever, or whatever the deal was. You had to have the. My father fought that, and for other things, and he never used the word N, or the N word. Not only that, I was really proud of him when he became, assistant business agent, because he got elected, and then so they made him, even though he wasn't a Mason. So there was, Boilermakers who worked in the shops, one location or whatever in a shop, and that's a job I eventually when I went to real estate school, graduated from real estate school, but I wasn't interested in it at all, and by that my father realized I wasn't interested, and so he paid for me to go to real estate school, and he paid for me to go to welding school, Lincoln Electric Company welding school. And so when I came back, there was a lot of need for welders, but an awful lot of welders were, farm boys and stuff like that grew up, just sticking they needed to fix something on the farm, and they learned to weld. But I went to the Lincoln Electric Company and came back a good welder. and I worked for quite a few years, and for a while in the Boilermaker shop for exactly 1 year. And then I moved on to more welding jobs, post office for a short period of time, a whole bunch of jobs. But I was really proud of my father. Because I never really heard any racism from him, except everybody used the word colored then, I guess. Um, but a lot of people working in shops, like I worked for the Darby Corporation in Kansas City, Kansas, for 1 year, and it was big. We built railroad cars, and the building, was a building, but there was no sides on it. Railroad trains could come through, and hook onto that type of stuff. In the wintertime, it was hot, and or did I say in the wintertime? I say in the summertime it was hot, in the wintertime it was cold. And there, I'd have welding, leathers on and stuff, and boots, steel-toed boots, so I didn't smash my feet and stuff. But it was cold, it was hot. But towards the last there, I was thinking, I'm not gonna, And there was a few times I went into work and I thought, I'm gonna go into work, and then at noon, of course, I didn't work on daytime, but I'll quit. And so I'd go in and, okay, I've been here half a day, so I'll finish the day out. And I'd come. Finally, I went into work, and I realized that was my anniversary date, and so I quit that day and moved on to other welding jobs, building trucks, different kinds of trucks, and finally gigantic trucks. If you're a truck driver or anybody, you've heard of Kenworth trucks. Okay, well, I didn't work building Kenworth trucks, but I worked for Dart Truck, which was a division of Kenworth trucks, except Dart trucks were massive, big. They were, we had to build them and then disassemble them partially so they could be shipped out. And I eventually had enough seniority that I could have actually moved over into the Kenworth division, and I'd have had my own little, welding station and stuff. But I would have had to go back to the second shift, and I wanted to stay on the day shift, and then life went on. But, anyway, so my father with the union, so, they were probably called, blacks by then. Maybe still colored, I don't know. But these guys working, there weren't any female welders, but later in life, well, I don't think hardly I worked with any, but later in life, of course, there was women welders too. But, these black men who were working were members of the Boilermakers Union, working in shops like the Darby Corporation and other places. And they wanted to get out working in the field. Like the Boilermakers Union 83 that my father belonged to all his life, and that I belonged to for a year and a half or so. Those guys were making good. We were making good money, but the guys who went out in the field, because they had to cover like a 4-state area, and they were paid really good money, and so the blacks were union members, and they wanted to, but there weren't any there, and the business agent refused. No. And I'm sure the guys probably in the field didn't want, But my father was the assistant business agent, and he insisted their union, their brothers. That's all. That was always, their blood brothers. They're union members, and they're entitled to it. So he got that taken care of. I'm sure it wasn't totally taken care of, but blacks then could work in the field. And then later on, the unions had to go through Congress or go through regulatory committees to get some labor laws changed. There were labor laws to prevent, discrimination in unions and that type of stuff. The Landrum-Griffin Act and the Taft-Hartley Act. And the reason I know those things is I helped my father become, before when I was still in high school, stuff like that, when he was protesting for things, I mimeographed off material for him and helped him with these signs and all that type of stuff. So kind of worked out good for me because I became pretty good at knowing labor laws and that kind of stuff. Kind of bad for the hospitals that I worked for that I knew those things. But anyway, then, so the unions got together to have apprenticeship programs, so a union could have, where normally would have been without changes made, you wouldn't have been able to do it. You couldn't have had an apprenticeship program where you had young guys in the union who didn't have seniority, who would like just come in from wherever, and that they would get preferential treatment. But for the apprentice program, that's what you had to have because you wanted, young people to come in, and then when they went out on a job in the field and showed up on a job, then you'd be, teaching them welding, blueprint reading, these various things. But they would, so they'd go on a job, and then you'd check them off, and then they became a what were we called? Journeyman, I guess it was it journeyman? And so then when that thing was set up, and of course you could only have a few, apprentices going through this program, or else you'd have, an apprentice showing up or a new person, showing up on a job to build a boiler. Or I worked down in Convent, Louisiana, on a refinery in Convent, Louisiana. And that was my first job going out. My father I would not have asked my father to get in the apprenticeship program or to get in the field because there were other people, and I wouldn't have asked my father, and my father wouldn't have, but what he could do is when other unions called the office, like Pascagoula, Mississippi, for shipbuilders, they needed welders, and my dad told me, hey, if you can, they're looking for welders, Pascagoula, Mississippi. So I started down that way. But when I got to New Orleans, I think it was, I thought, why go all the way? So I popped into the union office, Boilermakers Union office, with my union card, and they needed welders really bad at this refinery. And so I took the welding test. You take a couple pieces, you take a couple pieces of metal, thick metal, whatever, and then you weld them, and then they do various things to them. They X-ray your weld, then they put it in a machine and they build it to see if or they bend it and that type of stuff. So I went out to when I went out there, I knew enough when I knew I was heading for Pascagoula, Mississippi, I bought a book on knots, so roped, And when I got to Pascagoula, Mississippi, I went to work there on the Texaco refinery, and Well, anyway, I had bought a book and I was reading it up because needed to be. That was before uh, the uh, can't remember the name of the but where there was some oh no not H I'm getting hospital. Spent 30 years in hospital security, getting things mixed up with that. OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Act or whatever, that went into effect. And but so anyway, I showed up in Convent, Louisiana, and they, of course, they hired in local people who weren't Boilermakers. I mean, they weren't excluding them. There weren't any there. So remember, by the way, I was 40 pounds under the minimum weight requirement. I couldn't get in the military, but so the local boys, I wasn't much older than them. Mr. Howard, one we climbed up climbed up, and that was before OSHA came in. It was after that OSHA came in. So after that, you had to have a like a thing around you, and then you had to have ropes that you hooked on as you went up or whatever. But when it was like there was just things that had been welded by welders, like a bar that you step on, and you climbed up. But when I got there, these there'd be like two young men, local boys, to help me weld, get what I needed and that type of stuff. And so and they called Mr. Howard, would you tie me off, because we had a thing, And I thought, if you only knew, but I had read, and I tied them off. But actually, I was so skinny that if I had fallen, I think I'd have gone right through the belt thing that I had on. But anyway, I think I missed the point. My father, when the apprenticeship program started up, the white men, didn't want well, there was already, by then, my father had got he couldn't have, but there was some black men who wanted to be in the apprentice program thing, and of course the business agent didn't want, he had to, my father basically forced him to allow blacks to go into the field work, and then my dad insisted they are union members, they are brothers, and so they got and I'm sure not in as high a number, but so pretty proud of my father. But I'm sure when he was on the job with the rest of the guys, because I actually worked with the rest of oh yeah, I think I told that story, and I won't tell the story again because it doesn't really fit in, but my first job, not the first job, when I came back from welding school, I worked a little bit in a wrought iron decorative iron shop where they really didn't need a welder, although they had this gigantic, well, like what you see at a shopping mall or something, where the tower goes, the thing goes way up and there's a sign on it or something. And this wrought iron decorative shop, they got the contract for this thing, and they brought in, the gigantic, they had to knock a wall out of the building to get it in there. And it was owned by two brothers, two real nice guys. Mastercraft Metal, I think is what it was called. And they said, oh, we got to get this, pipe tower, it's got to be welded all the way around because they were joining up, making it taller. And they said, oh, how can we do, how are we going to do this? Maybe we can, get something to turn it or whatever. And I said, no, I can weld it, you know. And because I'd learned welding really well, and I could weld overhead, so I just got underneath and just welded it overhead, so that worked out. But then I went on to, but anyway, that's what it is. When I was working on these railroad cars, I was underneath them all the time, welding overhead underneath the thing. They would bring, a guy there would bring basically a lead box with a thing that could be moved and had radioactive material in there, and to weld or to x-ray the wells. Not all of them, but to make sure that. And when I'd raise my hood up, when he would show, if he would show up, and he was across from me, I would move. He says, "You don't have to move," but I wasn't too smart. I'm not too smart now, but I just knew, no. Actually, I was in high school. It wasn't a high school thing, but I was in civil defense, the ground observer corps, and all types of things like that. Trained as somebody for the civil defense that would go out in case of war and measure the radiation. But anyway, this guy would show up, and I'd say, "I'll move." And underneath the railroad car, I mean, I hardly ever talked to anybody, It's just maybe when it was really cold and we took a break, there'd be a gigantic can or whatever, on with fire in it, try to get warm. But this one guy who was doing the radio, the stuff. One time, I don't know why, we started talking underneath the car. I mean, we were taking a break. We didn't just talk to each other, And he said, "I may not be here tomorrow." And I said, "Oh, what, are you quitting or what?" And he says, "Well, I used to be a Kansas City, Kansas police officer." And he said, I forget how he put it, I got kicked off the police department for, well, then he said something about, how it is, when these, and he didn't use the B word, he used the N word. And yeah, we'd bring them in, and they'd always fall down these stairs we had in the thing. And I thought, oh God, I didn't say it, like, oh God, I'm thinking, And he says, "Yeah, I got fired." He said, "But I've been talking to the chief of police and telling him I want to come back." And he said, "Check back with him, and because they're needing officers." And he said he's going to talk to me tomorrow, and I may get taken back. And so if you don't see me, and so I think I was thinking they're not going to. Of course, I didn't know about the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department then. And then the next day he wasn't there, so I think he got hired back. But anyway, I guess I should stop this and let me know. Well, I should have. I mean, the audio may not even be working, so thank you for watching.